Namo Buddhaya. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning, depending where you may be in the world. And welcome to our Sutta study program. We're delighted to have with us today Ayya Brahmavara, who will be leading us. And I'll give her a little longer introduction afterwards, but we start with 10 minutes of silent meditation together, just to let people arrive and settle in. And after that, I'll ring the bell and we'll introduce our speaker and go from there. So 10 minutes silent meditation together. Welcome all. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Ratanataya. My respects to the Buddha and the Triple Gem, and also the senior bhikkhunis here. Good to see you, Venerables, especially Ayya Suvijana at Pasadi Vihar in Washington State, and also Ayya Brahmavara, who will be our speaker today. And welcome to all of you. Good to see everybody here today. So I want to briefly introduce Ayya Brahmavara. I think many of you already know her, but maybe not all. She's been in monastic life about over 25 years now, originally training in the UK, later in Thailand and around the world, including some time spent with Dhammadharini. She had her higher ordination here with Dhammadharini in 2021, and we're very grateful that she has continued to join us time by time, in person and also online like this for the teachings. So coming to us today from the UK, where it's quite late in the evening, so always appreciate you joining us for these programs. Welcome, Ayya, and I'll let you lead it from here.
Thank you so much, Venerable. It's a real honour to be able to join you during this winter retreat. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks also to Ayya Adi, who's suggested the sutta for this evening, the Honeyball Sutta. Just to first check, can everyone hear me okay? Is my volume all right? Yeah,
yes,
good.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you. And I can screen share.
Let's see. Let me make you a co-host.
Thank you.
Okay. And that should allow you to screen share.
Yay. Yeah, that's perfect.
I should say one thing, which is we had a Zoom bomber this morning. So I'm going to be on the lookout if I need to mute people or remove people, but we'll keep it open for now. So everyone can unmute themselves until we have trouble, and then I will take that privilege away. But yes, please, you should be able to screen share. Thank you, Ayya.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah, so we're going to look at the Honeyball Sutta today, friends. And big welcome to Ayya Suwijana and all other Venerables who are present today, and to everybody. And I'd like to, suggest that people feel free to ask questions and share reflections during the course of this time. And we'll hope to go through the entire sutta. It's actually quite, the actual teaching part, the actual Dharma that's really relevant is in a couple of sections in the sutta. So I think we'll focus on those. So the title of this sutta I really love, the Honeyball Sutta. I can just imagine little honeyball. You get them in India nowadays, don't you, and other places, and delectable small morsel of sweetness. And this sutta is rather like that. And it's also the sense you get is however you approach this sutta, it is delectable. It is beautiful Dharma. It reminds me of, there's another sutta where the Buddha's praised for having such attentive disciples. So whenever the Buddha spoke, people listened to him avidly. And the simile that's given is as if someone's pressing out honey at a crossroads. Honey was clearly a very big treat in those days, maybe not many sweets available. And honey was the sweetest of the sweets. And so this Dharma that we're going to be diving into today is really very beautiful, very delectable, very delicious. So I'm going to put up the sutta, and I'm actually using Bhante Sujato's version because it has the Pali as well as the English. So I'm going to start reading, and I'll stop when the time seems right, and we'll have a little bit of discussion. So have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans near Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Tree Monastery. Then the Buddha rode up in the morning and, taking his robe and bowl, entered Kapilavatthu for alms. He wandered for alms in Kapilavatthu. I should just mention Kapilavatthu is the actual Sakyan country. This is the Buddha who's returned to his homeland at this point. He's visiting his own people. He wandered for alms in Kapilavatthu. After the meal, on his return from alms round, he went to the great wood for the day's meditation. He plunged deep into it and sat at the root of a young wood apple tree to meditate. Dandapani, the Sakyan, while going for a walk, plunged deep into the great wood, and he approached the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he stood to one side, leaning on his staff, and said to the Buddha, "What is the ascetic's doctrine? What does he assert?" So I'm going to stop there. So this is quite striking for people who are familiar with the suttas and how the Buddha is related to by people. This is really quite unusual. Dandapani was a sort of possibly distant relative of the Buddha. And seemingly, when the Buddha returned to his home country, many people were very pleased to see him and, in fact, became his disciples. In fact, many people ordained, including close family members of the Buddha, didn't they? And they became bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and they became arahants, quite a number of them. But there were some elders, perhaps in the community, who were not very happy that the Buddha had stepped away from his destiny as the leader of the clan. So his father was the chief or the king of the region. And the Buddha stepped away from all of his inheritance as the eldest son. And so perhaps there were some people who disapproved of that and were not pleased with him coming back as a beggar in rag robes, teaching the Dharma instead of leading the community. Anyway, Dandapani was possibly, get the impression, not an old man, but perhaps a conservative figure in the community. Dandapani means a person with a stick in a hand, probably a nickname for this person. Stick in hand, and he has his stick with him. And actually, when he's speaking to the Buddha in this way, it's very disrespectful. He's not bowing, he's not addressing him, even as a venerable mendicant. In those days, people who'd given up their household life were revered, respected for their sacrifice, if nothing else. But Dandapani really approaches the Buddha in this very rude, almost aggressive manner, straight out with the questions, calling him Samana. So this is the context. We can pick up that this is quite an abrasive, quite a combative approach, almost like looking for an argument. Ayya Suwijana.
Okay. Can you hear me? I'm doing something strange with my computer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It's it struck me with this, knowing the monastic code, there's also a Sakya training rule against teaching to anyone with a stick in their hand. And the danda is considered a weapon too. So yeah, like you were saying, this is very aggressive. Standing there with a stick in the hand, speaking when that staff is recognized as a weapon.
Yeah. Thanks, Ayya. Yes, absolutely. Really gives the picture, doesn't it? Ananaya.
Nice to see you, Ayya Suvijana and Ayya Brahmavara. I just wanted to quickly point out that in Ajahn Suchito's translation, he has footnotes all over. He has the blue asterisks throughout the text. And what he says is that this Danda, then I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to pronounce it. Dhanadavi or whatever, is actually the Buddha's, both his uncle and the father of his former wife, Yashodhara. And so it isn't just that he's there to the Buddha and he's unhappy. He's very unhappy with him because of his so-called abandoning of his family. Anyway, so so it lays, those footnotes lay it out that was really why he was with his staff and comes across him and is not very happy with him. So.
Thank you, Ananaya. That's amazing. I didn't know that piece, that he's the father-in-law. Thank you. Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. I'm going to take a controversial stand on this because I've studied this particular thing extensively. And it appears that Dandapani, which actually means one who carries a stick, was probably somebody who was injured in some way, and Buddha would have known this because it's his relative. Because normally when someone comes upon the Buddha, even if he's out in meditation in the forest or whatever, he'll say, "Oh, there are seats, friend. Here, have a seat." You know what I mean? That's like part of the initial. But if you notice in this, he doesn't say that. And knowing probably it would have been very hard for Dandapani to sit down on the ground and then get up again, probably because of some injury, or it could have even been, from birth or something, some kind of birth defect or something. There's also a thing where he calls Buddha Samana, or Samano, I think is the actual Pali. But if you click on it to see the Pali, that's also an epithet for the Buddha, and it also means aesthetic and all kinds of other very noble type of titles, right? It's not like he's just equating him to some run-of-the-mill monk, just running around here. So I think the stories that we hear in the commentaries, those were written several hundred years, after the Buddha's lifetime, and I think sometimes a lot of it is kind of just speculation, trying to fill in the blanks and make it a more, cohesive or something story. But in this case, I don't get that idea at all, that there's some sort of negativity going on between them. I don't want to spoil the thing, but when the Buddha tells him what his teaching is, he reacts totally astonished. Some people think he looks at Buddha with a insulting way or something like that, but it's not. If you were to tell me something totally astonishing, I might go just like this. And that's the actual description, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think he just couldn't quite understand what the Buddha was talking about, because normally those ancient ascetics will say, "Oh, I believe in this meditation or this attainment, or you know what I mean, or this philosophy or something." And Buddha brings it down to a very, very real type of thing. Excuse me, not to argue with anybody, something like that. Anyways, I don't want to speak too long, but I'm just saying that I think there's possibly a different interpretation, different way of looking at it.
Sadhu, thanks, Richard. That is rich. That is really rich. Thank you for that. I mean, people just take whatever, you can from the sense of the mood or the tone of the occasion. Ananaya.
One last bit, and this is Bhante Sujato's notes, his asterisk. He does say that when he finishes the discourse, or when he greets this person, he uses a respectful term that you would use for a family member or someone actually known to you. Now that's Bhante Sujato's take, is that this is actually his relative, and he would be automatically respectful to him. And just very quickly is that in that time in India, there was a practice of, so it's a brother and sister, and the brother marries the sister. I mean, it's like it's a very close genetically kind of a thing. So that's how this fellow could possibly be the father-in-law, and at the same time be his uncle, because he's the brother of his wife who died, Maya, and his foster mother. And also, it's the way that it was. They did this purposefully among the upper classes at that time. That was just research I did. I was just curious years ago, and that's kind of what they said was the
connection.
Look it
Yeah. You've gone quiet, Ananaya. You're muted, Ananaya. So am I.
Oh,
No, I'm not.
no, you're not. You're not.
Now we can hear both of you.
Okay.
Well, just quickly, you can look this up or verify that on your own. That's, that's just, but it made sense about how those.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so interesting. So really quite a close relative on two sides, as it were. How amazing. Thank you all for this. It's rich background for us. Okay, we're going to go back to the sutta now and continue. So, Dandapani's standing to one side, leaning on his staff. As Richard says, maybe because he's disabled. As the commentaries assert, because he's disrespectful. But who knows? He speaks to the Buddha in this way. What is the ascetic's doctrine? What does he assert? Friends, this could be a close relative speaking to a close relative. It could be someone a little bit challenging. Just interpret in whatever ways we can. And it's interesting when we come across, or when we're familiar with lots of suttas, to then get a sense of the difference in the ways in which the Buddha was addressed by different people. So this is a very direct question, and maybe a little challenging. The Buddha responds in this way. And this, I feel, can mirror for us the relationship, how the Buddha responds to Dandapani here. He says, "Respectable sir," he addresses him as Awuso. It's quite an endearment in a way, or a friendly way of addressing a person, and also on a level of, you could say, equality. Close, friendly, warm. "Respectable sir, my doctrine is such that one does not argue with anyone in this world, with its gods, maras, and divinities, this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its gods and humans. One does not argue with anyone in this world. And it is such that perceptions do not underlie the Brahmin, or the holy person, who lives detached from sensual pleasures, without indecision, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state." So I think we should unpack this a little bit. He goes on to say, "That is my doctrine. That is what I assert." So one does not argue with anyone in this world. And the perceptions do not underlie a person detached from sensual pleasures, without indecision, stripped of worry, and rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state. This is the Brahmin. And the Buddha, of course, lived at a time when, there were these, just as today, caste differentials, and the Brahmins were the highest caste. And he used this word, Brahmin, and sort of changed the interpretation a little in his dispensation, in his teaching, for the Brahmin to truly be a holy person, a person who's free from greed, hatred, and delusion, or striving in this direction. I'd like to invite any comments, reflections, and I'm really delighted that people have been looking at the sutta, been studying the sutta, so please feel very free to come in with any reflections or thoughts about this incredible statement from the Buddha here. The assertion of non-aggression or what's the word? Not to argue, not to dispute with anyone in the world. And how is it we can avoid this? How is it we don't get into disputes and arguments and disagreements? And we'll be exploring this further in the sutta. Ayya Suwijana.
Oh, yeah, I'm just borrowing Pandit Sujato's notes too. I do not argue with the world. It is the world that argues with me. Is a kind of a famous quote by the Buddha, and that he doesn't wish to argue with anyone, but then people do come to him with disagreement. So that's from the Samyutta Nikaya 22.94. So I just was borrowing that note. It's but I think that's it is trying to just kind of like trying to even whether it seems that Dandapani was being confrontational, so that the Buddha is trying to, yeah, like you were saying, just to be peaceful in this situation, not to cause conflict himself, even if people are feeling confrontational. So
Yeah.
and then what really stands out to me about this is that the Lord Buddha is summing up this first and second noble truths, it seems to me, here. Because it's detached from sense pleasures, without indecision, stripped of worry, rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state. So it's looking at the abandoning the cause of suffering.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ayya. Anybody else like to come in at this point? It's a beautiful statement of peace, isn't it? And so soothingly given, one could imagine, and also an introduction to the Dhamma, to the teachings leading onwards. Shall we see what happens? So the Buddha, having responded, just trying to, can you see? I imagine you're seeing my screen, which is a bit confusing looking.
Yes, we can see your screen. It's a little small. Not sure what's...
Okay, I'm going to try something. Stop share. One moment. That's better. Okay. Here we are. Okay. So the Buddha, having said, "This is my doctrine, that is what I assert." When he'd spoken, Dandapani shook his head, waggled his tongue, raised his eyebrows until his brow puckered in 3 furrows, and left, leaning on his staff. So this is oftentimes the shaking of the head, waggling the tongue, creasing up of the forehead, a sign of, Richard, perplexity perhaps, and that he leaves leaning on his staff because he's disabled. It has been interpreted as someone who's kind of disapproving or not really understanding, or perhaps thwarted in his attempt to get a rise out of the Buddha, to have a bit of an argument with the Buddha. Could be any of those things, friends. Leaning on the stick could be due to need, or it could be a kind of disrespectful way of conducting himself. So the conversation ends there, and it hasn't really been a very fruitful exchange for Dandapani, sadly. The impression I get is he's not very receptive to the Dharma teachings. He's not willing to really learn from the Buddha. That's just my impression. And I'd like to continue, if that's okay with everyone, to dive deeply into these teachings here. So Dandapani disappears. Then in the late afternoon, the Buddha came out of retreat and went to the Banyan Tree Monastery, sat down on a seat spread out, and told the Sangha what had happened. So the whole thing repeats in the sutta. When he told them about this exchange, one of the mendicants said to him, "But, sir, asserting what doctrine? Does the Buddha not argue with anyone in this world, with its gods, maras, divinities, ascetics, Brahmins, gods, and humans? Asserting what doctrine? Does the Buddha not argue with anyone in this world? And how is it that perceptions do not underlie the Buddha, the Brahmin, who lives detached from sensual pleasures, who is without indecision, confusion, who is stripped of worry, who's rid of craving for rebirth in this or that state?" So he wants to understand this statement of the Buddha. And so sadly, one could consider that Dandapani could have asked the same question and had a chance to learn the Dharma, but he didn't do so. But then the Buddha's taken this to the Sangha, and he's giving this opportunity for further learning, to really understand where this statement comes from, how one addresses somebody who perhaps is looking for an argument, who perhaps is somewhat aggressive in their approach. What does this statement really mean? The Buddha responds in this way. He said, "Mendicant, judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies to desire, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, desire for continued existence, and ignorance. These underlying tendencies come to an end if we do not find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from where perceptions arise." The Buddha goes on to say, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies. This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. So this is the teaching in short. And it is a monumental teaching. It is a wonderful teaching that Ayya chose for the winter retreat here, because isn't it the case that we, when we're on retreat, when we have a chance to meditate more, to face the reality here in a way that's less distracted than when we're busy in everyday life, when we have some time for retreat, when we give more time for our meditation practice, we start to recognize what's actually happening for us all the time. It becomes more clear to us that we are constantly impacted, beset by, receiving, processing huge amounts of information in the way of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. We'll come to this later in the sutta, this sort of analysis of our situation. We are beset. We are beset by impingement, sense impingement, experiences that are being had. And when any kind of input comes in to us through the senses or through thinking, what happens? Very quickly, we have perceptions, we have proliferation happening as a result of past karma, as a result of that which we have learned, the ways in which we've learned to make sense of the world. And so this tendency to make more of our experience, to multiply our experience, to react to our simple experiences of seeing, hearing, etc., to imagine and proliferate around our experience. It is this, the Buddha's saying, that grows suffering, grows the underlying tendencies that he lists here. So I'd like to go back to the statement. I'd like us to look at it again and just to really, consider it experientially. Does this make sense to me? Is this my experience? How do I understand this teaching? So the Buddha says to this questioning samana, mendicant, judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. That's us. We're beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. This word here, papancha, sanya, sankha, this collection of concepts put together here. It's very interesting to look at this. Papancha, sanya, sankha. Papancha is proliferation, multiplication, adding, imagining, multiplying. Sanya, perceptions. Sankha is like ideas, concepts, notions. So we have an experience, we have perception around that experience, and then very quickly that perception can turn into a whole lot of extra imagining, remembering, ideation for us. We are beset, samudacharanti, we're beset, we're overwhelmed, we're flooded by all of this activity, mental activity that goes on. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person, or ideas that stem from our perceptions beset us, overwhelm us. If we don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, so if we're not invested in this process, if we're not attracted by it, if we're not getting any kind of delight out of it, then this is the end of the underlying tendencies. This is the way out of, this is the way to diminish, to free ourselves from, to allow the falling away of these underlying tendencies. They are the tendencies to desire, to aversion, to views, to doubt, conceit, the sense of self, the desire for continued existence, that compulsion to get more, to be more, to become, starts to diminish, starts to fall away, and ignorance itself, which is the root cause of all of this suffering. And when we are able to come out of or to face this deluge and to not roll with it, to not sort of flow with the current of ignorance in this way, then this is the end of taking up the rod and the sword. This is the end of quarrels, of arguments, disputes, of accusations, divisive speech and lies. All of these ways in which we argue and cause strife within and amongst ourselves. This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. Ehewa. What a beautiful, incredible teaching this is, friends. This itself, just this, is something to really contemplate. And I'm so happy that you are contemplating it during this winter retreat as we face, all the unpacking of all of the mental activity. When we go on retreat, isn't it, we often have a lot of work to do to just to be able to be present, to be able to slow down, to be able to sit and to attend to what's here for us. And oftentimes I notice myself that when I'm on retreat, there's a whole load of material in a way that's sort of impacted or something that is able to be released. And so there can be a sense of facing a lot of imaginings, a lot of memories, a lot of ideas, a lot of views about things, and all the emotional baggage that go along with all of that. And just to be able to be present for that. And as the Buddha says here, not to be attracted by it, not to believe in it, not to invest in it in any way, not to identify with all of this mental activity. It's just so much baggage to allow it to pass away, to pass through. Having said this, having given this teaching, the Buddha then got up and left. He didn't elaborate at all. He perhaps, was tired. Perhaps at this point he was quite old. I'm not really sure. Others might be able to tell me what the ideas are about the period of time this was in the Buddha's life. But for whatever reason, and this happens occasionally in the suttas, the Buddha would get up and leave after giving a pithy, a short teaching. And it was then up to the Sangha to discuss amongst themselves, to understand further, which we'll come to shortly. This is what happens here. Anybody like to come in? Richard?
Thank you, Ayya. Yeah, that statement about the proliferation of perceptions. Wait 1 second, I just want to go to a different page. Papancha Sanya Sanka. So Papancha is proliferation, Sanya is perceptions, and Sanka can mean classifications, right? So in our mind, we're classifying things, oh, I like this thing, this is good. I don't like that thing. It's, not good. I don't like, I'm neutral to, I don't care, right? But what Buddha does is he reduces all of these manifestations down to the 3 characteristics. And that's why he's no longer proliferating perceptions and categorizing, because he's saying, they're all constantly changing. This leads to dukkha, which I prefer to call bad results as opposed to suffering. That's my personal preference, And why? Because there's no real self there. Because if there's a real self there, then it lasts. But all these objects we're trying to get, whether it's our own bodies or some other object to interact with, right, with our senses and some other body or some other thing, right? They all fall into the three characteristics. Therefore, you don't have to, make these type of judgments and have these preferences and everything like that, because everything just, once you see that clearly, everything just settles down in your mind. Okay. Anyway, that's my point of view. Thank you very much for listening.
Beautiful, Richard. Thank you so much. It's lovely you bring in these three characteristics here, because that's one of the ways, isn't it, to just cut through all the rubbish, all the nonsense. Not to be disrespectful or dismissive of our thoughts, but really and truly, we do want to discard and let them go. We want to come to this presence, this understanding of the reality of the way things are. And that is exactly it, isn't it, Richard? This is what the Buddha said. When you cut through all of the delusion, what do you appreciate? What can you perceive clearly? And that is impermanence, impersonal, the impersonal nature of things, the impossibility of holding anything together as a self, and the bad results. Yeah, I like that. The unsatisfactoriness, the imperfection here. Yeah, thank you. Ayya Suwijana.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for also mentioning that internal conflict, and how that, especially during a retreat time, we see that. And I think a lot of times we externalize that, and that's why we get into conflict with others. A lot of time, the more sensitive you are to your own internal stuff, the more you see, oh, I'm very critical of this person for this, this, and this, but do I see that in myself? Can I see that in myself? And a lot of times the very things we criticize others for are things, the characteristics that we have in ourselves. So yeah, so that retreat time, as you're saying, helps us bring that up and really see that our own yeah, the inner conflict. This really pithy expression. When I first read this sutta, it was Ajahn Thanissharo's translation, and he said that this proliferating perceptions assail a person. And that struck me that we're assailed by our own thinking. We're beset, or beset isn't, I guess maybe so in America, maybe not such a commonly understood term. So later when I read beset, It didn't strike me as the same way, but that we're assailed by our own perceptions and the proliferation that arises from that. And then I also pictured the Buddha's giving this really pithy teaching, and I imagine the monks are all kind of dumbfounded also. They're like, wow. And then they look at each other after he's gotten up and left and say, what was that all about? I mean, to a certain extent, they probably understood a lot more than Dandapani would have, but it's very condensed teaching. And then I don't know if you mentioned this, Ayya, but these are the 7 Anusayas. And this is one of the suttas that all 7 appear. And there is in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a list that's just saying these are the 7. But I think to understand these 7 is really important, to understand that these underlie there's something, they're latent, they're also known as latent tendencies. And then they can be triggered. We might think that we're free of desire for continued existence or any of these, but something may trigger it. We might be free, be free, oh, I'm completely free from repulsion and views or whatever, but something may trigger these in us. They're just lying latent until there is a trigger for them, or we don't even, or we're not even aware that they're lying dormant. So anyway, that's there's something to really to pay attention to see how they're triggered.
Thank you so much, Ayya. That is such a really good to highlight that. I'd like to come back to the sutta and let's look at them. Let's look at them each one, just to take them in, friends, and to consider these latent tendencies. As Ayya Suwijana says, these are really important to consider. And because these are the forces that keep us in struggle, in suffering, in samsara. And we could also just look at the Pali here. So the Anusaya, my teacher Goenkaji describes them as the sleeping volcanoes, which I find quite a good image. That's just it, isn't it, Ayya Suwijana? They're under the surface, bubbling away, but we're not aware of them, except that occasionally they might erupt, and there's a whole flow of lava and a whole load of heat and light and sound, and we can be surprised sometimes. Again, when we're on retreat, isn't it the case that sometimes we can be having a very peaceful time externally, but inside things can be really erupting, and we can be surprised by the power of sankhara, of mental components that come up for us, seemingly out of the blue sometimes. So these sleeping volcanoes, these Adusaya, are the work. And, you know, to be able to take time for retreat enables us to give the space, give the time for the possibility of diving a bit deeper and becoming aware of these tendencies. So we have desire, the tendency to desire, raga, the tendency to aversion or repulsion, patiga, the tendency to views, ditta. This one, we can observe all the ideas and concepts, and often views can really jump up at us when we disagree with something. We have a different point of view to somebody else or to the community, and it gives us a chance to see this anusaya. And there can be a lot of heat and a lot of energy around disagreement. And if we're skillful, we don't argue with anyone, but we see, as Ayya Suwijana said, the internal argument that's going on. And as she again mentioned so helpfully, isn't it the case that often the things that really bother us in other people or around other people are the things that we are needing to resolve inside ourselves? There's something here I'm not seeing clearly. There's something that needs to be unpacked here, that needs to be investigated in this heart, in this mind. So looking at views, this tendency to views that we have, ditthi, is another anusaya, another force that propels us, and it's often invisible. It needs to be investigated. Whenever we have a reaction to something, some idea, some concept, something someone says, get very interested in that, because those reactions are telling us that there's some hidden issue, that some anusaya that can be investigated. So views I find are very helpful, a field of investigation when there's any kind of reactivity to anything that's said, anything that's asserted, anything within ourselves that we're struggling with, in the way of ideas, in the way of concepts. The next of the anusayas, vicikiccha, that is doubt. This is again a mental phenomenon, isn't it? When we're going around in circles, when we're questioning unhelpfully, when we're getting caught up in ideas. And then the desire, oh no, excuse me, conceit is the next one. Mana. Mana, all the proliferation, all the holding, all the suffering, all the confusion around the sense of this one, me, mine, myself, all of this that we can very helpfully, continually investigate whenever there's a sense of self, whenever there's a sense of ownership, whenever there's a strong reactivity around my space, my thoughts, my way of doing things. Look out for mana. It's a chance for us to see the suffering there. And through seeing the suffering there, we can start to emerge, to let go, to free up from this anusaya of conceit. Next one, the desire for continued existence, bhava raga, this force that compels us from life to life. And it's a strong one. And we can very quickly, we might feel, oh, I don't have that. I don't want to continue. But just wait, just imagine, or just see if somebody threatens something that belongs to us, if somebody threatens us, how powerful that force is to protect, to fight back, to assert the survival of this one. This is not a bad thing. This is instinctual, but on this very deep level, we have a very powerful force within us that is this bhava raga, desire to live, desire to continue, desire to become. And finally, avijja, the root cause of all suffering, the sleeping volcano, the anusaya of ignorance, of confusion, of not seeing clearly. So these are the forces that keep us arguing, keep us fighting, keep us beset or overwhelmed or impinged upon, keep us struggling in samsara. And so this is our work, and this is the work of retreat and the work of insight. When we meditate, we often look so peaceful, don't we? And we're sometimes peaceful, but oftentimes it's a struggle, isn't it, friends? We're sitting here and we're sort of grinding our teeth and tense, and sometimes we don't even know why, but sometimes and oftentimes actually we have something going on that is an internal struggle, and it may be around emotions that come up for us, anger, frustration, irritability, desire, wanting, not wanting. It may be ideas and thoughts, scenarios playing out for us, worries, concerns, events that have happened in the past that we're replaying and wanting to relive in different ways. And it goes on and on. But when we allow ourselves to meditate, and particularly if we give more time for meditation, this is all wonderful, to allow the sort of Pandora's box to open and just let the material flow out. It is like a volcano erupting quite often. When we're really practicing well on retreat, we can just observe the upswelling, you could say, of past material, past karma. We don't need to analyze it particularly, but we do need to feel and to be aware. And I personally find it so helpful to be aware of the body and to be aware of the breath, because this is a container for us. We can be overwhelmed by thoughts, and emotions and really start to flow with them and get caught up in them, unless we have something to anchor the mind. And that something, most helpfully, is the physical reality of this form sitting. Simply, you know, the weight of the body, the breath. If we can allow our attention to rest in this simple reality of this presence that's not deceiving us, that's not confused. The body is what it is. Feelings are what they are. They're honest, they're sincere and authentic. If we can rest here, then all of the mental proliferation that happens for us when we really allow a clearing and a purification, and when we're really paying attention, all of the mental proliferation can flow out, you know. The volcanoes can erupt. We can observe how they erupt, how the lava flows, the patterns it makes, the process, and we can appreciate that sense of the release, the relief, the freeing, the cooling that can happen as a result of this wise attention to our experience. Any comments, questions, Richard?
Thank you, Ayya. People who are familiar with them may notice that those 7 anusias many of them are the same as part of the 10 fetters, or are similar to items in the 10 fetters. And so I think at a fundamental level there's some sort of interconnection there. Anyways, but one other point I wanted to make, it's like a realization that came to me when this was going on. Buddha makes a rule that you can't talk to a person carrying a danda, right? Well, with Sankaracharya and other sects that came after him of the, Vedic, which you might call the resurgence of the Vedic tradition, which eventually resulted in modern day Hinduism, many of those renunciates in those sects carried dandas. There were ekadandas, tree dandas, and everything. And I'm wondering, knowing that the Buddhists had this rule that you can't talk to a person with a danda, I wonder if they actually made that rule, these sects, not the Buddhists making the rule, but these sects, to avoid knowing that the Buddhists will not interact with them and discuss philosophy with them, that may show the error in their idea that ultimately goes back to Shankaracharya. He wanted to reassert the Vedas as the authority, which Buddha in the sutras shows over and over again. No, you can't just say some doctrine as authority. You have to also have a experience with it. And that's why, like he talks about the Vedas, he says, well, the rishis, there's 7 rishis that supposedly wrote various parts of the Vedas. He says, did any one of them say that was the final and absolute truth, right? And they had to admit, no, actually, none of them actually made that assertion, right? So, and there's another thing. There's actually a line in one of the Vedas where one of the rishis is describing things about the nature of the universe, and then he says, but actually no one knows. So the exact opposite is asserted in the Vedas. Not is it not the pure authority, but that assertion is saying that since no one knows, then nobody who wrote anything down in the Vedas could have known at that time either. So, but anyway, it just occurred to me, this idea that all these sects developed this idea that they had to walk around with a stick, and they call it a danda. It's a Sanskrit word, right? And therefore, if they encountered Buddhist monks, well, the Buddhist monks would have a rule, and they can't set their danda aside or anything like that, other than like close by them while they're taking a bath or something. You know what I mean? They have to keep it with them at all times. Anyways, thank you very much for listening.
That's brilliant, Richard. Thank you. That's an amazing angle on things. Yeah, how to avoid getting into a conversation with the Buddhists and having all your ideas shot to pieces. That's brilliant. Carry a stick. Thank you for that. Friends, I'm going to bring us back to the sutta now, and we're going to go to the I think I'll just praise you a little bit before we do because of the time constraints. But what happened was that the Buddha went into his quarters, having given the pithy teaching, and the monks were, as Ayya Suwijana says, possibly quite perplexed by this, possibly not really able to take in the full import of this very profound teaching that we too could spend much time contemplating to really understand it and consider it deeply. So they thought that they would turn to Venerable Mahākāccāna, who was the Buddha's foremost disciple, in expounding on pithy statements from the Buddha. So he was very good at unpacking the teachings from the Buddha. There are a few other suttas I really recommend. They're very similar in some respects in the teachings within them. So to look at the other teachings that Mahākāccāna unpacks or expounds upon from the Buddha. And they're the Madhupiṇḍikasutta Sutta, Majjhima 133, and also Majjhima 138. So write that down and have a look at those suttas because they're quite interesting to consider alongside this Madhupiṇḍikasutta. So they turn to Mahākāccāna and they ask him, please could you explain further? Very modestly, he says, you really should have asked the Buddha. Why are you asking me? If you really want to understand, then obviously the Buddha is the person to explain this to you. But they've managed to persuade him to have a go. And of course, he gives a wonderful teaching, which we're going to look at now, which the Buddha later praises and so authenticates as equivalent to the word of the Buddha. So that's just a little explanation of this next part of the teaching. We'll go straight to it. So having been persuaded to give a teaching to explain in detail the meaning of this brief summary recital given by the Buddha, Mahākāccāna says, well, listen, apply your minds well, I will speak. And we can take that advice for ourselves. So attentively, let's apply our minds to this teaching. Venerable Mahākāccāna said this, Reverence, the Buddha gave this brief summary recital, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. He repeats the teaching, which I'll just not say in full, but the essence of this teaching, that judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset us. If we do not approve, welcome, or get attached to the source from which these arise, the perceptions, then just this is the end of the underlying tendencies, the 7 that we've gone through. I would say just this is the attenuation, is the wearing away, is the emerging from, the coming out of. Perhaps gradually for most of us, these underlying tendencies can be slowly put aside, slowly seen through, slowly understood. And as the Buddha went on, this is the end of taking up the rod and the sword, the end of quarrels, arguments and disputes, accusations, divisive speech and lies. This is where the fight ends. This is where the struggle ends. This is where peace can manifest. And as much as we can let go, that much peace we can experience. If we fully let go, see through, come out of all of these anusaya, then we are not going to be in any danger of arguing with anyone or with this one internally. there will be peace. There will be, as the Buddha manifested in his conversation with Dandapani, his meeting with Dandapani, there's nothing but peace. Anyone coming to the Buddha, so many did, to argue with him, to refute his teachings, to in some way have a go at him, harangue him. Impossible to ruffle that peace, impossible to make any kind of impression on that peace, the unshakable heart of a Buddha. It's really beautiful, you know, to see this again and again, how the Buddha was approached by so many different people, sometimes disrespectfully, sometimes aggressively, and there was always the same response: kindness, compassion, Dharma teaching, peace, unshakability. Anyway, having given the short, pithy teaching from the Buddha, repeated it in full, Mahakachana goes on to say, this is how we can understand this way of practice that's given to us here. Eye consciousness arises depending on the eye and sights. The three meet, and that is contact. Contact needs to happen in order for feeling to arise. So we see an object, we're conscious of that. Contact leads to feeling. What is felt is then perceived. What is perceived, we think about. What we think about, we proliferate. And what is proliferated is the source from which judgments beset a person, views, opinions, ideas, imaginings. So looking here at the Pali, friends, we have contact, passa paccaya vedana. Contact leads to feeling, and from feeling comes sanjanati, vitaka, thinking, vitaketi. We start thinking about the experience that's being had, the perceptions that have arisen through feeling, through contact, and then the vitaka, the thinking, leads to papancha, this wonderful Pali word, which means multiplication, proliferation. And it is this proliferation that then has an energy and a momentum that leads us to form views and opinions, ideas, memories, concepts, and so forth. All of this mental baggage, all of this mental clutter. This occurs with respect to sights known by the eye, both in the past, in the future, and also in the present. So this is the cascade. This is the process by which we, how to say, amass mental suffering, mental layers of activity, delusion, imagination, ideation. It all comes from, if you trace it back, it comes from thinking, which comes from the perceptions, which come from the feelings that arise through the simple moments of contact. Eye and sights, ear and sounds, nose and smells, tongue and taste, body and touch, mind and thinking. So there's an event, a simple momentary happening, and then there's this cascade effect. And we can note that this has happened in the past, it happens in the present moment, and it may happen in the future, but the mind will jump into the past and future and not necessarily be here for the present moment. But if we're practicing well and we're not getting immersed in the past or the future, we can focus on the present moment and we can observe this happening in the present moment. And our work, isn't it, friends, throughout retreat times, is to observe this, and to come back to the essential reality. As Richard said, of anicca anatta dukkha, of impermanence, constant flow and change, of unsatisfactoriness, of the impersonal nature of experience. We can come back to the momentary experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. This is our meditation practice, isn't it? Is to come home, is to come back to the present moment experience, whatever it is. What is being experienced here, right now? And when we do this, it's like we're coming back to the home, to the temple, to the ground zero, to the beginning of it all. And if we can rest in this reality, just seeing, in the seeing, only the seeing, in the hearing, just the hearing, we can observe and be aware of the tendency to, we feel what we feel, we have perceptions around those feelings, we have thoughts around those perceptions, and we may find ourselves proliferating, creating, thinking more, adding more, multiplying the experience. We may find ourselves doing that, but we, in our meditation practice, the encouragement is to notice that and come back. Oftentimes it's coming back to the object of meditation and resting there. Whatever that object of meditation may be, body, breath, sound of silence, something simple, something present, something embodied, so that all of this process can be slowed down, can be let go of, can be seen. So this is our practice. I'd like to come back to the sutta just because of the time, and to note that Mahākāccana goes through each of the 6 senses, describing how it is that we have an experience, a simple input, moment of contact at any of the sense doors. Something is felt, pleasant, painful, or neutral. There will be perceptions that arise. And then from those perceptions, thinking, from thinking, proliferation. What we proliferate is the source from which judgments, driven by the proliferation, beset us. We get overwhelmed, we get flooded by this process of multiplication. This occurs with respect to ideas known by the mind, sounds heard by the ear, sights seen by the eye, touches, tastes, and smells, in the past, in the future, and in the present. So where there is the eye, sights, and eye consciousness, one can discover evidence of contact. So we can note, be aware of, pay attention here to the sense impressions, to the sense inputs. Let's be aware of seeing. Let's be aware of hearing. Be aware of touch, taste, smell, and the thinking process. Isn't it the case, friends, that we can meditate and be aware of the thoughts that are just rolling on, but we do not have to make anything of them. We do not have to add to them. We can question them. We can just let them be. And so with all the other senses. So the Buddha, Mahākāccana, goes on to say, we can observe these 6 senses. Why don't we focus our attention here? And we will be able to catch that process, that cascade, and not get caught up in it anymore. He also goes on to say where there are no senses, where there is no eye or ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind, there's no evidence of contact, then you will not have the corresponding feeling. That goes without saying, really. It's obvious, isn't it? There is this life that we have, this human life. We have these 6 senses, or most of us have most of them. And this is our world. This is our experience. If we did not have this, then there would not be this process. This, in a way, is our opportunity, isn't it? This is how we get to purify our hearts and minds, is through having this body and having these six senses. This is like the doorway to the practice, makes practice possible. And isn't it wonderful that we can observe these things, that we can observe our own minds? How much of the time do we do this? How much of the time are we observing the mind? And how much of the time are we immersed in it as me and mine, my thoughts, my ideas, my views, which of course are right because they're mine. They must be right. How much of the time are we overwhelmed by this papancha, this proliferation? How much of the time are we essentially present and nipping in the bud all of this cascade and simply aware of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking? And this is the encouragement here in this sutta, to come back to the essential and not to hold on to any of it, not to identify with any of it, not to be attracted by, to have an attitude. Really, in this sutta, it's very clear to me that the attitude from the Buddha, and then this more detailed exposition from Mahākāccāna, is an encouragement for us to let go. It is the holding to this process that creates the suffering for us. If we can be present for our experience with this attitude of letting go, letting it be, just letting it flow, making nothing of it whatsoever, hands-off approach, stepping back approach, spaciously observing the reality here, then this is the way to come out of all of this suffering, to allow the anusaya to arise and to pass away. Not me, not mine. Dhamma. It's all Dhamma, arising and passing. So this is our practice, and particularly on retreat, we can really get into the flow of this practice, just as we can spend so much of our time flowing with the papancha, the proliferation. We can actually turn that around and we can start to flow with the purification, with the letting go of proliferation. We can start to really notice that freedom of the wise attention, simply present, not engaging, not delighting in, not holding to anything whatsoever. If there's anything that we're noticing that we're leaning into, any reactivity, any holding, that is the place where we want to pay attention and remember this attitude is the essential way to free our hearts from suffering, the attitude of letting go. So friends, I want to just return very briefly to the sutta just to conclude. So Mahākāccāna gives this teaching, breaking down and describing or analysing the pithy statement of the Buddha in terms of our actual experience, our experience of the six senses. He says, this is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief summary recital given by the Buddha. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. So those mendicants, approving and agreeing with what Mahākāccāna had said, went to the Buddha, bowed to him, told him what had happened. I'm always impressed by the memory of all these people in the suttas. They seem to remember everything word by word. I think they probably did have great clarity of mind. We know Ananda remembered all the teachings of the Buddha that he heard. Now that is incredible, the eidetic memory of Ananda. But many, many people, including of course the Buddha, could repeat at length teachings, conversations, word for word, accurately. It's very impressive. So they repeated the entire teaching of Mahākāccāna to the Buddha. In this manner, he spoke with these words and phrases, and the Buddha said this: Mahākāccāna is astute mendicants. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked this question, I would answer it in exactly the same way as Mahakachana. This is what it means, and that's how you should remember it. So this has the stamp of approval from the Buddha, this teaching. As I said earlier, we can consider it to be the word of the Buddha. When he said this, Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, "Sir, suppose someone who was weak with hunger was to obtain a honey cake. Wherever they taste it, they would enjoy a sweet, delectable flavor. In the same way, wherever a sincere, capable practitioner might examine with wisdom the meaning of this exposition of the teaching, they would only gain joy and clarity. What is the name of this exposition of the teaching?" You know, Ananda's remembering all of this for future generations. He is the one who enabled all of these teachings to come to us today, friends. It was his recollection, consciously and carefully throughout the time that he was the Buddha's attendant and hearing his teachings. He remembered them all and passed them on to us. This is why he's asking, what is the name of this one, of this teaching? The Buddha said, well then, Ananda, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the honey cake discourse, the honey ball discourse. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda approved of what the Buddha had said. Ewa. What a beautiful teaching. Friends, please review, reread and consider. And also the other teachings given by Mahakachana, the detailed expositions in Majjhima 133 and 138.
Sadhu, 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 anumodama. So, thank you very much, Ayya, especially for this at the end, bringing it back to our very simple practice, actually, of just sort of watching this process with our presence and awareness, and letting that be the vehicle that brings us out, allows us to let go through clear seeing. So especially appreciated that. This sutta in some ways can be very intellectual. It's very dense, takes a lot of unpacking, but I think absolutely I appreciate you pulling out the simplicity there. We have come to the end of our time. There are a few things in the chat. See, Janaki is sharing some thoughts about translation, and I would encourage her, if she wishes, to talk to Bhante Sujato. He's accessible. He's on Sutta Central, discourse.suttacentral.net. He gives explanations of his various translation choices and also sometimes engages with people directly on that forum. So would welcome you to talk to him about that. There was also a question from Ryan. Says, Ayya, you mentioned the Buddha retreated shortly after the teaching of this sutta, possibly because he was in an elderly stage. If that is the case, could it be that this teaching, although beautiful on its own, had been expounded numerously throughout the Buddha's ministry, reiterating the origination of dukkha and its cessation through dependent co-arising, sixth sense contact teaching, etc.? No. Well, I think we don't really know when this teaching happened. In terms of timeline, it said the Buddha's first visit back home was perhaps within a year of his awakening, and that might have been the time when his relatives were most confused and upset with him. They say on arrival back home, he had to perform miracles so that his family members would realize something was really different with him now and understand. But also we see Venerable Ananda is here, and by some accounts, Venerable Ananda didn't become the Buddha's attendant until 20 years after he started teaching, so it's unclear. But I don't think it's necessarily at the end of his life. But the part about this having strong connections with the teachings on dependent arising and so forth, I think is certainly true. Yeah. Anyway, do you have any comments on those points, or shall we close here?
No, I just love what you said, Venerable. Absolutely. And it is lovely that you bring out there, Ryan, the connection, to dependent co-arising and the sixth sense contact teaching. It's really good to see how all these teachings come together, isn't it? It's a wonderful, if we need any kind of mental food, friends, this is the nourishment we need, isn't it? To consider and investigate these teachings. And I love what you said, Richard, earlier about the Anusaya and how they relate to the fetters, how one could put those two together, the Anusaya and the fetters, and to see the similarities and how they intersect. And in the same way, to look at dependent co-arising in terms of this teaching is a very good exercise. So thank you for that, Ryan.
Well, sadhu. Thank you very much, Ayya, for being with us today. Thank you, Ayya Suwijana. Thank you, all of you. And we can close by paying our respects to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha together. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. We'll see you.